the IMM 5440 settlement plan for sponsorship agreement holders following Risk Management Plan A. So as you know, a SAW following Risk Management Plan A is required to fill out a separate settlement plan form from their undertaking form. And the reason for this is because SAHs under Plan A are not required to submit their settlement plan to IRCC along with their application. The only time they will be required to submit the settlement plan is in the event that IRCC does a case review or requests it from the SAW. So to begin with, Section A, you'll be providing some general information about the persons that you're going to sponsor, as well as the name of your sponsorship agreement holder organization and the family size and composition. In Section B, this is where you will begin providing details about your settlement plan. This is your settlement needs checklist. So in this section, you're going to identify who is going to be responsible for providing each of these settlement needs by checking the relevant box. Your options are the SAW, the constituent group, co-sponsors, and not applicable. Now, each of these checklists fall under a heading, and the heading is related to the time period for the sponsorship. So the first heading is ongoing over the duration of the sponsorship period. So these items below are related to things that need to be done on a regular basis throughout the year of settlement. As you scroll down, you can see that we're following a timeline. So to start off with, we are going to have pre-arrival tasks, as well as those that need to be done upon receipt of the Notice of Arrival Transmission, the NAT. You also have responsibilities to carry out at the time of arrival and within the first 3 weeks, 1 to 3 months after arrival, 4 to 6 months after arrival, 7 to 9 months after arrival, and 10 to 12 months after arrival. And when assigning who will be responsible for each of these tasks, you can select all of the parties to the sponsorship if you wish, or just some of the parties to the sponsorship if you wish. Ultimately, however, you need to realize that the sponsorship agreement holder organization will be held responsible above all else. This means that the SAW has to step in to carry out those tasks when the constituent group or co-sponsor fails to meet their responsibilities. Let's take a look at what happens when you select ensuring that there are plans in place for housing. There will be some additional questions that are revealed that you will need to give a response for. So the first question, you will need to describe what housing arrangements will be made for the refugee and to include details about whether or not you plan to use temporary housing and the type of housing, as well as the number of rooms that you anticipate will be available to the refugees. And most importantly, to indicate the number of people that may be living there. The second question is where you will provide the address of your planned housing if you know what that address is. So that would be the address information for the temporary accommodations and or the permanent accommodations. And finally, you're going to provide information about your backup plan if the initial housing plan does not work. So for example, if you had planned to find an apartment for your sponsored family in a particular location, but when the time of arrival comes, there are no apartments available in that location, you will need to explain in this section here what you will do in the event that that happens. Or if you had planned to have the refugee share accommodations with their co-sponsors. However, by the time the arrival date comes, perhaps the co-sponsors have lost their home. Perhaps there was a fire and they have nowhere to live now. What is your backup plan if the co-sponsors are unable to house the refugees when they arrive or at any time throughout that sponsorship year? If something changes where the refugees can no longer stay where you intended them to stay, what would be your backup plan? Now, here's a good example of when you would use the not applicable option. So if you are sponsoring a couple that has no school-aged children, this task, of course, would not be relevant to that specific sponsorship case. So in that case, you would select not applicable. Whenever you select the non-applicable option, you need to explain why this need is not applicable to this sponsorship case. And so, of course, we would indicate that this is a couple that does not have any school-aged children, therefore it is not a required step. Once you have completed the settlement needs checklist, then you will come to section C, the financial needs checklist. Now, as you may be familiar already, sponsors must provide one-time startup costs upon the arrival of the sponsored refugees, as well as ongoing monthly costs during the entire sponsorship period. And when you determine the amount that will be required for startup costs and the monthly amounts, you're going to do so by referring to the post-arrival support requirements for private sponsorships document that has been provided by IRCC. And you'll see the link for that document here. So before you move on to completing the financial needs checklist, it's a good idea to read through that document to understand how you are going to handle the financial needs of the sponsored refugees. You will also want to refer to Appendix A of the Guide for Sponsorship Agreement Holders to Privately Sponsored Refugees. This guide will provide you with additional information that will help you answer these questions as well. So the financial needs checklist, one-time startup costs. You're going to simply check each of these boxes, which is an indication that you have referred to those two documents and you have understood how you are going to provide these one-time startup costs. And these are a short list of items. It's not a complete list of what you will actually need to provide for the newcomers when they arrive. And under the ongoing monthly costs, again, this is in general, where you're covering basic needs, shelter, public transportation, and communication. And so definitely refer to those documents that are linked above and work on a detailed financial settlement plan where you have created a budget and you understand how much each person in the family needs for their settlement. And section D is the signature block. And so just as we had mentioned in the undertaking form, you are allowed to provide digital signatures. And so in the left-hand column here is where you would provide the individual's full name. And then in the signature block is where that individual themselves needs to type their own name, and they will date the form as well. And we do recommend dating the form the same date as the date of submission of the application to IRCC, because the forms cannot be dated any later than 90 days prior to the date of submission. Now, if you are a SAW that does not have a constituent group or any co-sponsors, then you can simply type not applicable in the blocks for CG signing authority and co-sponsor name. And of course, if you prefer, you can still collect handwritten signatures that are drawn using a pen. Now, below here, this is where you would add an additional co-sponsor's signature line. So where they would print their name and then they would type their name as a signature and add a date. You can add as many co-sponsors as you wish. And if you made a mistake, you can remove the signature line for that additional co-sponsor. The last part of this form simply indicates information for you to read so that you understand how the personal information that is being collected in this form is going to be used by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Once you have finished completing and signing this form, then you will select the Print Form button. And once the dialog box opens, you're going to select as a printer option Microsoft Print to PDF. And when you select the Print button, it will create a flattened version of this form, which can no longer be edited.